The following podcast is brought to you by the Bridge Bible Church.
For more information, please visit us online
at thebridgewired.com.
How are you? Warmed up? Feet thawed out after walking through all that snow and stuff and slush? Hope so. So we are continuing through our series in Colossians, and today we're going to be talking about being parents and what does that look like. So we slowed down, just in way of remembrance, we slowed down in Colossians 3 where it started talking about relationships, and we looked last week at the marriage relationship. And, you know, as I was thinking through all of this, like all of our life is marked by relationship. And it's not uncommon for us to be in many different types of relationships in many different places. So last week we just kind of looked at what does it mean to be husband and wife? What does that look like? What does that kind of relationship look like? But, you know, we're husbands and wives, we're parents, we're moms and dads, we're grandparents, we're workers and bosses. We have all these different roles and different hats that we wear. And as we look through the scriptures, Paul in Ephesians and here in Colossians, he writes about these relationships we have. And so this week we're going to be looking at this relationship that we have, parents and children, and what does that mean and what does that look like. And I don't want you to shut down if you're like, well, I've raised my kids and I'm done. They're gone. Some of us are placed as surrogate parents in this world. Some of us find ourselves in different relationships where we're actually influencing other kids and others that are around us. Just an example, my wife, Bethany, she works at the high school, and this past week it was interesting because she was talking with me about how her week was going, and there's one student who just came in and the guy was just exhausted. He's like, he's so exhausted. He's like, I can't think. I got all this stuff going on. And he was just kind of telling her how his day was and just how his week is gone and stuff like that. And she said, I might get in trouble, but I just switched off the teacher. And I just turned on the mom. And I said, you know what? Why don't you, how many mods you have? He said, I got 2 mods open where I really don't have to do anything. She said, okay, why don't you just come to my room, pull up a couple bean bags and just take a nap. I'll wake you up. And he's like, really? Like you would do that? She's like, yeah, you need to sleep because if you don't get the rest, you're going to be no good for the rest of your day. She said, why don't you just take a nap? And she said, I don't know. It felt like the right thing. Like the kid just needed to have mom at that moment. And so as we talk about being parents and we talk about Scripture going through this, we can't just compartmentalize and say, you know what? This isn't me. I don't have any kids in my household. No, sometimes God places us in positions where we are influencers and where we act as moms and dads. And so what does that look like biblically? What does a great example of a biblical parent look like or a biblical grandparent look like? And that's what we're going to see here. So it starts first with just the mandate of how we live our lives day to day. So we're going to go through a few Old Testament passages. I'm sure they're familiar to many of you, but we're just going to hit on them. I'm not going to spend a lot of time there, but we'll look at them. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9. Now this is the Shema, and this means to hear, to listen, but this is how it starts. It says, hear, O Israel, meaning pay attention. It says, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Now, before we get to the last part of this section, that is important. Listen. First and foremost, get yourself in a position before God where you're loving Him with all that you are. He doesn't even get to the relationship part yet here. Moses doesn't even write the relationship part here. He's just saying, here is what we should do. We should have our lives centered on God first and foremost. So listen, this is what we should do. And then he continues. So that we should fear, that you may fear the Lord your God, and you and your son and your son's son, by keeping all his statutes and his commandments, which, I backed up. Wait, I'm sorry. I jumped to the front of 6. Let me get down here to where we are. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way and when you lie down and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gate. And when the Lord your God brings you into the land that he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to give you, and he goes through the blessings, he says that's a testimony. So he talks in that passage that first we get our lives right, and then we start imparting the good things of God to our children, to the next generation. So the next passage, Joshua chapter 4. And if you're following with me, that's great. Or if you want, we're working on making sure that all the pages are there. Joshua chapter 4, verses 6 and 7, he says this. He says, that this may be a sign among you when your children ask in time to come, what do those stones mean to you? Then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the people of Israel a memorial forever. And what is he saying here? He's saying, listen, when God brought us through the desert and was bringing us into the promised land, he parted the waters. And what did we do? We put a memorial there to remember. We did something tangible to remind us of the goodness of God. And so it's not just the talking. What you also see here in the Old Testament is that there are times where we set up things that are memorials in our lives to teach of the goodness of God. There are holidays and seasons that we want to remember, and each family may be different. There may be a time that marks that God showed up and did something fantastic and remarkable and miraculous, and you want to remember that, and you want your kids to remember that, and you want your grandkids to remember that. And so there's this altar that they built here, and Joshua says, when we come into the land, later generations are going to come back and be like, why do we have these stones here? Like, why did we set this up? Well, we set this up to remember. We do that in our culture, don't we? I mean, I think the most famous place is probably Washington, D.C. You drive around D.C. and there's just monuments all over the place. Well, we should do this as Christians in a sense that we should have memorials in our lives where as we raise our families, there should be things that stand out, and there should be things that remind us when we see them. I think often one of the things that it's kind of lost, I think, in today's culture more and more as we've gotten away from the Bible and we've gotten out of Christian families, but more and more we see this go away, and that's the family Bible. How many of you grew up with a family Bible in the house? Like, it was always there, like on that one coffee table, and you couldn't touch it. Like, don't put anything on it. It's like, that was the family Bible. Like, that was grandma's or great-grandma's Bible. It was there, and they're like, why do we have that Bible? And it was memorial, really, to their faith, right? It was like, oh, well, they were faithful, and that was so important to them, right? There's times where we have these things in our lives. We can't lose them. So Joshua says we have these. Verses 21 through 24, he continues, he says this. Joshua 4, 21 through 24. You have that one? No? Yes? No? No? I thought I'd get that one. Okay. All right, I'll read it. And he said to the people of Israel, when your children ask their fathers in times to come, what do these stones mean? Then you shall let your children know, Israel passed over this Jordan on dry ground, for the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up for us until we passed over, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. So what's he say? He says, we center our lives on God. We love him with all that we have. Our heart, our mind, our body, our soul. We love him with all that we are. And then we start imparting the goodness of God to others. And we make memorials along the way of the goodness of God so we don't forget, and so that they have a remembrance of how faithful God is. And the end result is what? The end result is this, that all the peoples may know that the Lord is mighty. that he can save, that he works, that he moves, that it's not just something like, oh yeah, this is just part of our family tradition. No, he's real. God is real. And Jesus saves and he transforms lives. And these are the things he's done. And we want to impart that. And we want to impart those truths. And so the Old Testament talks in these ways of remembering God. Psalm 78 verse 4 is another one that says this to us. Psalm 78 4 says, we will not hide them from their children, but tell to the coming generation the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might and the wonders that he has done. How faithful are we to tell others about the great things God has done? So often what I've experienced in my life, and I think many of you can relate to this, so often it's not until grandma and grandpa have passed away, you start hearing the stories of their life that you never heard before. You're just like, when did that happen? Or what? And people start reminding you at this moment in their life, hey, there's that time when this happened in their life and it was very significant. And they start sharing these times. And you're like, why did I never hear this growing up? Why did I not know this as a kid? Why was this not shared? You see, if our faith is this important, if our faith is the core of who we are, and it's this important, we should be telling those testimonies to the next generation, to our children. We should be telling our story to them. There shouldn't be later in our life when people are reminding them of who we were, they should not be saying, I never knew that about my dad. I never knew that about my mom. I never knew that about my grandma or my grandpa. They should be like, yes, I knew that story. And I also know what God did through that story. And there should be that encouragement, that testimony. And here we are to tell the glorious deeds of the Lord to the next generation. We're not to hide them. And too often we look at our life, let's be honest, too often we look at the mess that we've come through or the mess that we've walked through, and we don't want to talk about that. It's not comfortable. But you know what? That's where the beauty of Jesus is seen. Like if we would just have the time to sit down with the next generation and just say, listen, I walked through some really broken stuff, some really messed up stuff. Let me just tell you how God used it. Let me just tell you how good he is, how faithful he is. Let me tell you how he transformed my life. Let me tell you how he took those broken things and made them new. You need to know this God because he will do so much in your life that you just need to know him. You need to trust him. You need to come to him. Because if he can do that in my life, he can do that in yours. Those testimonies need not to be hidden. And too often we feel like, oh, it's kind of like, I don't want my kids to know that about me. I don't want them to know the things I've done. I don't know. And kids, you always wonder, like, how does mom and dad know what you're going to do before you do it? It's because we've already done it, right? We're like, oh, I know what they're going to do. How did my mom know? Well, I did the same thing, So we have this testimony of the Old Testament telling us to speak forth the goodness of God to the next generation. Proverbs acknowledges, all throughout Proverbs, there's so many that deal with just training and raising the next generation. And it acknowledges that children from small all the way up through early adult years can be unlearned, needing instruction. Listen to this, and if you're in this area of youth, listen to this. The Bible speaks very clearly, and you think your mom and dad give you a hard time, or grandma and grandpa are giving you a hard time, or other adults out there. Listen, the Bible speaks clearly. It just affirms what we already have learned, and it's that when you're young, you need instruction. There's times where you lack sense, and you may be naive, and you may be gullible. I just read recently that one of the political parties wants to lower the voting age to 16. You want to know why? Because they can manipulate your vote. You're gullible. You're susceptible. They say, oh, if we can get them younger, we can have them do what we want. And Proverbs speaks to that. Hey, use the wisdom of your parents and those who have walked through this, who know the Lord and the testimonies of the Lord. Listen to them, young people, because they want to lead you in righteousness and good things. And you know what? I like this quote. I don't know who said it, but I like this quote. I'm not young enough to know it all. When we are young, we know everything. But the scriptures talk to us that, hey, we need to be realizing that God has given us authority to help us through. And Proverbs speaks to this, that in young ages, they're vulnerable to wrong influence. And if it's not corrected, what could start out as naive or cute leads to full-grown folly. So there's this command to train and to mold and to shape the next generation. And I'm going to go on a tangent for a second. Have you seen the parents who just kind of like indulge the 2, 3, 4-year-olds? I'm one of them. I indulge my 4-year-old at times. I shouldn't. And sometimes they do things like when I was growing up, if you back talked, that was, oh no. That was, duck and cover kind of thing. It's like, but nowadays, I've noticed that like it's cute. And we're watching like America's Funniest Videos, and people send in the videos, and they're filming their kids, and the little kid's in the back seat, and he's just going off, and he's like back talking and everything, and you hear the audience, and they're laughing. They're like, oh, it's so cute, and some comment about, oh, the kid, da 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 da, that's so cute. Listen, if that's unchecked, what's cute in a child, now let's multiply that into teenage years. Let's multiply that into their young adult years. If not trained and left unchecked, you're creating a horrible monster that later you're going to be like, where did they get like this? Well, remember that video you took of them and you're like, oh, that's so cute. And you showed it to everybody, like you were training them to act this way. And now what seemed cute is now folly and is not good. I see the same thing. And this one always got me, and so I never indulge this one. But it also gets me when I come to events and I see little boys and little girls and that, and like parents are already like, oh, wouldn't it be so cute? They're like a little couple, and they're like already putting them together. This is a tangent. This is not my sermon. I hate that because they like, oh, it's so cute that they like, oh, let them hugging each other and all that kind of stuff. Listen, if you're training your children to seek that affection in that way, and you're making it cute, when they're a teenager and your child is running around in all these broken relationships, of dating relationships, where do you think they're learning that? It was cute here, and now mom and dad don't like it here. Why? I don't get it. What changed? Well, your age changed and puberty happened and all that. It's like, but you trained them that it was okay and it was cute. Okay. So getting back, we acknowledge that the Bible tells us we have to be training. And we need to be trained. And our training as adults is under the authority of Scripture and under the Lord and in the body here and in relationship. Like we need to be trained. So when we train the next generation, we're training them in righteousness. We're doing it with the right heart and the right motives, which is to see God exalted. So feeding the ego or pushing their character in negative ways leads them to be hedonists. Self-seeking, pleasure-seeking. So we have to be mindful of how we train, because if we train improperly, we are going to be training the next generation to seek after its own good and its own pleasure and all that it wants. And there's so many different lines and lies and things that we could get into, but just think about that statement, and I know you probably have all the different things come into your mind like I did mine. We just tell them. You deserve it and go after it and whatever your heart desires. And all. You know what? Our heart is wicked and deceitful above all things. Who can know it? We have to train them well and say, this is good and this is right. And so if we don't do that, we're actually pushing them to become hedonists, self-seeking, pleasure-seeking people. So a godly man who left his children unchecked in the Old Testament, a man after God's own heart, was King David. We look at David's life and we love King David. But if you look at his parenting, he is not a man to emulate. He is not one to walk after. He did not do what the Old Testament was saying to him. He was after God. He loved God. But did he train the next generation? No. In fact, Amnon raped his half-sister. And David didn't do anything about this. And so Tamar was raped, and then Absalom becomes infuriated that David does nothing, so Absalom goes and murders Amnon. And then later tries to overthrow David and take his spot. And then when Absalom is killed by the general of the army because he's in rebellion against Israel and in a revolt, David weeps and cries and throws a fit that his son was killed. It's like, where do you think he's getting this behavior, David? You haven't trained him. And so his grief is misplaced. I understand he's grieved that he lost his son, but that whole story is just warped and twisted because he didn't train his children. And then Adonijah comes along at the end of David's life, and Adonijah also makes a run for the throne when Solomon's supposed to take it. And you just see this perpetuated in his family and in his sons, that they're not following after God the way Dad did. Why is that? Because Dad didn't take time to shape them. Dad was too busy with the things of God and with the things of the kingdom to shape his children. And so his children fell into rebellion. Listen, that can be us. That can be us. Are we too busy providing? Are we too busy working? Are we too busy doing the things that we want to do that we're not shaping our children? So we need to take this very seriously, what God says to us. Ephesians 6, 1-3 says this. It says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land." In Colossians 3:20 says this, "Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord." Now, I'm going to talk to you kids for a moment and young people for a moment. Okay, what do I consider a child? Anyone still living at home under the authority of mom and dad? Listen, if you say, well, I'm out, like I'm in college or whatever, listen, if mom and dad are paying the bills, you're a child. Okay? I don't care how old you are. If you're 30 and you're living at home and mom and dad are paying the bills, you're a child. And so you need to be honoring your parents and their authority while you're in their home. And I think sometimes this kind of in our culture gets a little bit convoluted because we do send our children off to college. But listen, you're still under mom and dad's authority even though you're away. Because who is taking care of you ultimately? They may not be there in that moment. And yes, you are growing in your liberty and your freedom and understanding what it means to be an adult. But you're still at that moment of this weird transition in culture. And you're still under your parents even if you're not living in the home. Because most parents, even for those 4 years that you send our kids off to school, are still taking care of our kids. We still have that home, still have that room at home. They're coming back at break. We don't want them to, but usually by that senior year, we're like, are you sure you want to come home? We turned your room into an office. You know, it's like, we're like, we want you to be out. We want you to grow and be able to go out. See, that's the point. Like, we want to launch our children as adults who love God and are able to serve the community around them and go do the things that God has called them to do, but we train them. So children, we have this commandment to honor our parents. So this is hard because, like I said before, I like that quote that says, I'm not young enough to know everything. At a young age, we feel like at times we know what is right, what is good for us, what's best. And we don't often understand why mom and dad say something the way they do or why there's certain rules. But listen, the Lord has placed them in this position. If they're following after God, like we said in Deuteronomy, with all their heart, mind, soul, with all that they have, the reason they say the things they say is because they want good for you. And sometimes I think it's good for us as children to step back and say, you know what, I may not agree with this, but do I believe my mom and dad love me and want good for me? If the answer is yes, like I know they want good for me, then maybe there's a reason for this. I might not understand it, and I might not agree with it, but there's a reason for this. And I need to be respectful of it. I need to be obedient to it. As we are obedient, we start learning obedience to the Lord. Listen, if you will rebel from your earthly father and mother, how much easier is it to not listen to the voice of the Holy Spirit and rebel from God? Because you don't see Him. It's easy to start hardening your heart to God if you're it's easy for you to harden your heart to mom and dad. So they're there to train you and to talk about the good things of God. Listen, mom and dad, if we're talking about the good things of God and we're training well, and we're going to talk about discipline and training well in a minute, but if we're doing those things well, then our children, hopefully, even if they don't understand, they will know it's for their good and for their joy. And so we have to come along and train our children, and children know that it's for good. It says that it's the first commandment with a promise in Ephesians. And see, in the Old Testament, if you didn't do what you're supposed to do, and you didn't follow your parents, there's some severe consequences that could happen to you. But even today, just think about it. Just growing up, little kids, don't run out in the street. Why? Because you could get hit by the car. And usually what do the kids say? Well, I'll move. I'll see it. It's like, no, you won't. That's the whole point of our rules. And we always test them, right? As young people, we've always tested the boundaries. That's what we do as we grow up. We're like, how much can I do? What am I able to do? Listen, when you get to my age and older, I'm at the point now where I look at things and I think, I would never do that. There's a reason that young people do things that older people would not do. Because one, our bodies don't work anymore, and we can't do it, right? And we're like, your body's not supposed to do that. Like, your butt does not go over your head. I'm sorry. That is not supposed to happen, right? But kids, I'm going to go do this. That looks fun. Let's get on a bike, put a camera on my helmet, and go down this mountain. Wow, this is awesome. And adults are like, that's really not a good idea. There could be some consequences. There's a reason, in our youth, we just do things and we look at things. But if we're not listening to the wisdom, there can be some dire consequences. And it doesn't have to be like Old Testament consequences where you disobey your parent and you get stoned. Now, sometimes we, as parents, we're like, man, I wish that was still the law, man. Kids drive me crazy. But, when we speak, young people, when we speak, we say, is that really a wise choice? It's because there's wisdom behind it. There's years behind it. There's age behind it. There's understanding behind it. So we're to train and to create discipline that develops their character, develops their soul. It's all to prepare you as you go forth into the world. So hopefully to go forth and serve Christ, young people. To develop your character and your soul so that you can go forth, hear the Spirit of God, and go do the things that He calls you to into His kingdom. That's an awesome task. And so that's why we train. So that means parents are to discipline. We are to discipline. Look at Hebrews 12, verses 3 through 11. It says, consider him who endured for sinners such hostility against himself so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted in your struggle against sin. You have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one He loves and chastises every son whom He receives. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as it seemed best to them, but He disciplines us for our good, that we may share His holiness. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. So what we see here is that we are disciplined by God, and He makes this parallel. We were disciplined by our earthly fathers, and what we respected them for it. Think back. I'm not talking about those parents that were overbearing, harsh, and abusive with abuse or with their discipline. But I'm talking about those who properly administered discipline along the way, and sometimes it was tough. Sometimes you needed that backside to be whooped. I know I needed mine to be taken care of a time or two because of things I did. And I remember those times where my parents were firm or stern or had to bring about some type of punishment, and I respect them today for it. I look back and I think, yeah, when I was growing up, this happened in my life. And it was good. And I respect them for it. How much more, he says, that God disciplines us. If we're not disciplined, then we're not sons spiritually, he says here. But think about this from an earthly perspective. If we don't discipline, are we truly loving the children that God gave us? If we don't care for them and check them and mold them and shape them, do we truly love them? If we just leave them to their own devices, if we just say, hey, go do whatever you want, go and just live and just try that and experiment on that and have that and whatever you want. Oh, okay, I'll buy that for you. If you want it, I'll give it. If we just give into this permissiveness, do we truly love our child? Well, the scripture says, no, you don't. Because they're going to run into their destruction. To truly love them is to show them the areas that will bring brokenness in life and warn them against it and move them away from those things as you can and to show them what is good and bring the discipline and instruction. And so he says, here we have to discipline. So parents, if you love your children, you treat them as children and train them. Meaning you can be friends with your kid, but don't let them be your buddy. Don't let them be your friend. Don't be equals with them. There are times where friendship is beautiful. I have a good friendship with my teenagers, but I am their dad. At the end of the day, we may be friends at times, and we have a great relationship, and we talk, and we share stuff, but at the end of the day, I am dad, and I will pull the dad card any moment if I need to. Right? Because I'm training my teenagers. I'm shaping what they're doing. I'm helping them guide them through life. At the end of the day, they're not going to be with me. I want them to go, and I want to have my wife back. You know, it's like they call on mom all the time, and I'm like, I want mom too. In fact, I married her. I want her more than you do, you know? And so at the end of the day, it's going to be me and Bethany again. And my kids, hopefully, are going to be launched out into this world, serving King Jesus and doing awesome things for the kingdom. And I'm going to be praising God, saying hallelujah for all that he does to them. But as we're walking along and we're together, yeah, we can be friends. But at the end of the day, I'm your dad. I'm your dad. And my job is to train you and shape you and mold you and guide you and to release you. And so I don't want my kid to just be my buddy. And you see on social media all the time, hot grandma, hot mom, hot teen, and they're all wearing the same clothes, and they're all doing the same thing, and they're all acting like little teenagers together. And it's like, what is that? Like, why are you acting like that? Why are you putting yourself out there this way? You are a grandmother. Have the respect and the honor and dignity that comes with being a grandma. There's nothing wrong with that. And you're a mom. Be the mom. Be the parent. And respect grandma and train your daughter. If this is what I see there when I see these kind of things, I see 3 generations of brokenness. That's what I see. 3 generations of stuff that's been perpetuated. And it's going to keep being perpetuated. We are to be different, and Christ changes us, and our relationship with our children is different than the world's. This has to be that way. It just looks different. So we discipline. Now, discipline is not synonymous with spanking. Spanking can be a part of discipline, but it's not synonymous. And discipline has to be thoughtful. It has to be done with their age and their character and where they are in life, and it has to be done well. Discipline is a training. Discipline is the practice of training. It includes punishment at times, but it's intentional directing of one's actions to bring about a desired result. 1 Corinthians 9, 25 through 27. Look at Paul. He talks about discipline here. In 1 Corinthians 9, he says, Every athlete exercises self-control, that's discipline, in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body. That's training, exercising, self-control. That's molding. I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. We do the same thing with our kids. We train them. We do discipline. Listen, we live in a culture where there's so many videos about, 10-minute exercises in the morning, 10-minute exercises at night, how many different ways to get, get our bodies into shape and have health and all the different things that are out there. Like, we're obsessed with it as a culture, health and fitness and that. And people will go through crazy discipline and regimens to get their body to get a certain way. Listen, we should be training our families to get them spiritually fit. And there's discipline there, and that means there's things we say yes to and things we say no to and things that we do. And at times there has to be some punishment that comes along. So discipline is an intentional training. So when we hear discipline, it's not just, I spanked my kids when they were disobedient growing up. No, discipline is I intentionally carved the path. I said, this is the way we should go as a family. And I led them. And so parents, that's what we do. We lead. We lead them and we say, this is what it looks like to be spiritually in shape, to serve God, to love God. What does that mean? That means we have to be doing what Paul says here. We have to be training ourselves. So our kids are so good at picking out our hypocrisies, aren't they? Man, they see it and they're like, what about that right there, Dad? It's like sometimes speaking up here and then going home and asking the question, what did you think of the sermon? It's not a good question to ask. Because the kids were like, well, you said. And then usually they even get my hand gesture. And then they go through the whole thing that I said. And they're like, well, what about that, Dad? Like, because you did this week. And it's like, yeah. What does it mean? It means I need to be training my own life. I need to be training my life, but openly in front of my family, saying, listen, I'm not going to get it all 100% right, but I am training, and I am going through discipline, and I am doing this to be spiritually fit, and this is what it looks like. And kids, come with me. Let's do this as a family. I want you to follow after God with all that you have, and this is what it looks like, and we're doing this together. And one day, I'm launching you out, and I've trained you so you can do this on your own, and you can train your kids to do it. I don't have to be there any longer. I can release you to go follow Christ. And so, we have to train ourselves, and we have to train our kids. It says this to us. It says in Colossians chapter 3, it says, fathers, do not exasperate your children lest they lose heart or become discouraged. We're not to exasperate or provoke. And to exasperate is to irritate and to frustrate intensely. And to provoke is to stimulate or give rise to an emotion, usually a strong and unwelcome one in someone. We're not to train and discipline in such a way that we're making them frustrated and angry and upset. It's to come along and guide them. So what does that mean? Do not do that. It means show restraint. It means show restraint in how you discipline. Be wise about it. He uses it actually as a negative. He says, you have parental authority, and don't use it in such a way that you make your child angry and rebellious. Show restraint in how you do this. You have the ability to do it, but he puts it in a negative way. He says, don't do it in such a way that the principles of being godly overshadow the personhood of your child. We have been entrusted with children, or the influence of children. If you're teachers or doing Big Brothers or something like that, like you have been entrusted with these children who are image bearers of God. And you are not to put the principles of being more or less a Pharisee, like you have to do the law. we're not to put the principles over over their personhood. We see them as people, as individuals, and that means discipline for each child may be different. The way it's shaped is a little different. We all go after the same things, but we don't come in such a way that we're so rigid and so hard on the commands of God that we overlook that we have little image bearers of God in front of us who need to grow in His image and need to grow in Christ-likeness and need to understand grace and mercy. Need to understand forgiveness. Too often, Deuteronomy 6 talks about what the household should look like. And if we're not walking in those ways, we need to learn to walk in those ways. But too often, we just become legalistic at times. And our kids get it. And some get it so good that they'll give you all that you want. They'll parrot it back. And then when they're on their own, they do their own thing. Or, as we'll see in a little bit, they become the older brother of the prodigal son story. So we have to be very careful in how we discipline and how we train. We need to look at them as individuals made in the image of God. We look at direction and then start to bend them to it, and often without grace and understanding when we do it harshly. So we look at direction, we want to move them that way. We bend them to that direction to follow God. We don't negatively motivate our children. Man, living in Central Europe, I got to see firsthand negative reinforcement. And then I got to see it more clearly when I came back to the States. And negative reinforcement is this. We would see kids over in Lithuania and Poland. They were fantastic when it came to playing music and doing all these extracurricular things. And then they would play a piece. And it would just blow you away. I mean, young kids just playing magnificent pieces of music. I'm just like, wow. Like, look how young this kid is, and that's beautiful, and that's so great. And what's the negative reinforcement? It's not good enough. Psh, that measure right there, what were you thinking? What was that? Like, that was horrible. Like, you can do better than this. That's not acceptable. Like, and the kids are like, okay, and the kids are beat down negatively. You're not towing the line here. Well, we do the same thing spiritually. What is that? You're not doing it. Like, this is what it says. You have to. That's negative reinforcement. We shouldn't have that in our homes. Our house should be a place where there's laughter and grace and mercy and love and forgiveness. Like it should be a place your children want to be. Why? Because they're experiencing Christ in the relationship with their parent. They want to experience that and know what it's like. And they understand, hey, if I step out, okay, yeah, there's going to be discipline. But overall, the relationship I have with my parent is one of love and grace and mercy and kindness and forgiveness, and they're training me for my good, and I want to be in that situation. That's positive reinforcement, and at times there's discipline with it, but there should be mercy, grace, and fun in our homes. Another thing, don't take the actions of your kids, parents, don't take their actions too seriously. Have you ever feel like when they sometimes mess up, when our kids sometimes mess up, that it was against you on purpose? Hear me out. Sometimes it is. Sometimes they just want to get you. But by and large, sometimes our kids are just kids. And they just do things that kids do. And they're not even thinking about you in the moment. They're like, that looks fun. I'm going to go do that. Or, oh, that movie, I know, I want to watch that. Like, that looks entertaining. And then later, they're like, I shouldn't watch that, or whatever. And then we come along and we see the offense and we're like, how could you do that to me? We take it too personally. Listen, don't take it so personally. We need to just train and guide and say, okay, all right, that was the action. Now what do we do? What was the heart behind that? Why did you do that? Why did you feel that way? What did it make you feel like after you did that? What caused you to want to do that? Like, ask questions. Don't take it so personally. Ask some questions. Find out what kids are doing. So what we want to do is to train them. Again, the reason we have children is so that we might see the grace and mercy and transforming power of Christ, one, in our lives, and two, as he transforms them and what he'll do in the world around us. It's to show the beauty of Christ. Children, show the beauty of Christ. Okay, couple things. I'm going to run through these quickly. We got a couple minutes. How do we bring them up? We nurture them. Nurture is care for and encourage the growth or development of. So we care for and we encourage the growth and development of the next generation. And so that's different at different places. So when they're little, it looks different than when they're teenagers. But we're still nurturing all along the way, right? And so discipline has to be first. Discipline must be consistent. If you're going to have discipline and training, it has to be consistent. I mean, going back to the sport analogy, going back to the getting in shape analogy, we have to be consistent with our regimens if we want the end result, right? And if we keep going back to opening the bag of marshmallows and eating all the marshmallows, we're not going to get off the sugar, right? I mean, we have to be consistent. What does that mean? Well, we got to do the things that get us away from that and quit doing those bad habits, right? Consistency. Well, discipline is the same way. Listen, there's got to be consistency. And how often is it that we train one way and we will come down on our child and we'll say, this is a no. And we're firm on it. And we get them. We do what we have to do there. And then the next time, man, I'm just tired. I'm going to let it slide. I don't want to talk about that. Again, you know what? And we just kind of just stop it. Just stop. Just do something else. Redirect. Okay, redirect. And then another time, we're just passive altogether. You don't even acknowledge it. I mean, there's this range where kids are feeling this out. They're like, especially when they're young, is there going to be consistency? And sometimes we do it the opposite way. We neglect to bring any kind of discipline. Then we're just kind of I'm getting annoyed with it, so I try to redirect or whatever. And then the third, fourth time they do it, we just come down hard on them. They're like, where did that come from? I didn't see that coming. I used to do this. I did this all the time, and no one's ever got me. That inconsistency does not train towards righteousness. There has to be consistency. Children understand what is done when disobedience occurs. So when there's disobedience, and let me say that, not accidents, disobedience. When there's disobedience, they should understand what the consequences are. And it should be right for their age, right? I'm not going to spank my son Caleb. He's a grown man. He's 19 years old. I'm not going to take him and be like, come here, over my knee, boy. That is not going to happen. And it's not going to end well for me. I'd probably be the one get over his knee at the end. But it has to be consistent and it has to be appropriate, right? So we have to think through it. And if it's an accident, it's an accident. Things happen. How many of us think that we have a 4-year-old who on purpose would go over and put her drink onto the table where you have that nice tablecloth that you put out and then be like, watch this. They don't do that. They're 4. They put their drink on the table like this, They put it up there and then they reach for it and they knock it over. And what do? We lose our mind, right? Well, how could I can't believe you. And they're like, it was an accident. We don't discipline for accident. We come alongside and say accidents in life happen. And we nurture and we train. So later when our kids are older and they come home, they're like, Dad, I was in a car accident. I was in an accident. They know that accidents have grace and mercy and kindness and okay, let's deal with it and not flying off the handle in strict, stern discipline. Now, if they're mishandling the car and that caused the accident, maybe we should talk about that. That might be disobedience. What happened there? Now there's a consequence. But if the kid's like, it was snowy, I was only doing 25, but the car slid and I hit the guy in front of me and it's an accident. Right? So we have to be consistent with our discipline. We have to know what to train, how to train. Discipline must be age appropriate. So think about where they are. There needs to be a sense of fairness and justice with the offense. Your kids are big on that. all the way up through young adulthood. They want fairness and justice. And they'll remind you if their sibling's punishment doesn't seem fair or just. They're like, hold on, they didn't get, and you'll be like, okay, well, they're not you. This is shaping individuals, right? And there has to be reason. And if you talked about why the discipline's different from child to child, they need to see the fairness and justice. Oh, okay, I can see why you would do that with this sibling and not this one. Okay, that seems fair. Our kids watch. And they watch how we discipline each other in the household there as we have more children. So it needs to be a sense of fairness and justice to it. Discipline must engage each child individually. So that's what I was talking about. Engaging each one individually, who they are as an individual, seeing them. God engages us as an individual. He disciplines us personally, individually. He shapes us. He knows where we need to be changed and transformed. So we mirror that with our discipline. Discipline must be administered in love and not reactionary. Again, we minister discipline in love, which may mean we have to walk away for a moment and be like, sit there, I'll be right back. I'm going to go in this room and lose my mind for a moment and then collect it back, and now we're going to come back and we're going to be able to talk. And I want to tell you something. One of the worst times for me was when my parents would say, Rob, go to your room right now. And I would be sitting in there like 10, 15 minutes. I'm thinking, this is not good. Like, they didn't even talk to me. They just sent me away. Like, sometimes we need to do that, though, as parents, right? So we can discipline in love. So when we come back, we can say, okay, I've dealt with my emotion, with maybe taking offense that I shouldn't take offense, or all those things that just got stirred up in me when this happened. I've dealt with them, and I've dealt with them properly. Now I'm ready to engage you. I'm ready to talk with you. Let's see what needs to happen here. How do we deal with this situation in a way where I can administer justice and fairness and love and grace, and we can deal with forgiveness, and we can grow closer to Christ? That's what needs to be mirrored. The last one, discipline should be forward thinking and part of a relationship between parents and children. Forward thinking. Too often, we heard in the call worship, too often we get stuck in the here and now. Discipline should be forward thinking. It's not just about this moment. It's about the relationship that will endure. Lord willing, our kids will come to faith in Christ, and it will be an eternal relationship. We will be with them in heaven, standing beside them, singing praises to our King, Lord Jesus. But it's forward thinking. It's not about this moment. This is just one step in a relationship that's long lasting. And our goal is to train a heart and a mind that loves God, serves God, and follows God, made through shaping that relationship. A beautiful picture closed with this is the prodigal son. The father raises two sons. They both know what's right. One son learns to love the law, the older son. And he always does what's right. He never misses work. He's always there. He always does the right thing, right? And the younger son grows up and he says, you know what? I want to just stretch my wings. I want to do my own thing. I've been under this authority too long. And the loving father says, you know what? I've disciplined you up to this time, but I'm going to let you go. You can go away from me. You can go out. There will be consequences, but you can go. And he hands him his inheritance. And that son goes and lives his life the way he wants to live it. And at some point, he's at the lowest point and he's feeding these pigs in another man's field. And he's sitting here thinking, I'm hungry and I'm starving. The pigs eat better than I do. You know, I have what? A loving father. One who had a relationship with me. One who took care of me and nurtured that relationship. And his punishments were right and just and fair. And he had kindness and mercy and love. And he allowed me to go. He didn't want me to, but he allowed me to. I should go back to him. And maybe not as a son. Maybe he'll just bring me on as a hired hand. And so that son returns. And what happens? The father runs to that wayward son, wraps his arms around him, puts a robe on him, puts a ring on his finger, puts shoes back on his feet, brings him in, and he celebrates. My son's home. He's returned. He's come back. Like, he's come back into relationship. And now there can be forgiveness and healing and wholeness here. And we see in that father a picture of what we should be as fathers and mothers. Like this way of training our children. And yes, they're going to live their life as adults. They're going to do things. But there's this sense of training them and showing them what's good and what's right. So when life catches up, and it does catch up, they say, I should go back to this. I should go back. That was good. That was right. I need that. And they come back, and there's forgiveness and healing and mercy, and that son is restored. And then you see the two brothers. The one who grew up loving the law, who just did it, who never saw the love of the Father, but just said, I would do it because that's how we do it, and this is how it's supposed to be, could not forgive his brother, could not come in and celebrate, could not be a part of it. And the other father said, I wish you would. I wish you would understand grace and mercy, because my justice is good, and it's kind, and it's right, and I've restored him. And I wish you would understand that. He's even training the older son in that moment to understand what grace and mercy look like. That's a beautiful picture of this family has such a dynamic that I think we all can relate to. And that father shows that walking that tension between two different types of sons and how we are to be. Always training, always showing grace and mercy and forgiveness and kindness, always moving towards God, always moving them, whoever they are, towards God. So we are to train our children so that they would love Jesus with all their heart, mind, body, soul, and strength, and that they would one day tell their children of the greatness of God in their lives. Let's pray.
Thank you for listening. To find out more about the Bridge Bible Church
or listen to previous podcasts, please visit thebridgewired.com.